Okay, so we have a great opportunity here because I think the three panelists each contribute something quite distinct, so that's awesome. And so what I'd like you to do is just put up your hand, state the question, and I'll pass this down the panel so that each of them can have their say.
Sorry, can I just clarify, were we talking about happiness, or were we talking about eternal or extended contentment? Or what are we defining it as? Is it something that lasts long, or is it like excitement?
Sure. All right. For me, there's a difference between what most people call happiness and what we might call contentment. Because contentment has a connotation of being fulfilled or enough or complete where you are, right? When you talk about happiness, it sounds like something that you want to achieve or strive for. And that sort of points at what I was talking about earlier, that if you're sort of going, you're looking to get that happiness feeling, it is probably something which is motivated in a sort of an egocentric way, that you're wanting something for yourself. I want happiness. What does it cost? What is the experience that I need? Whereas contentment is more saying, I have a lot of things. There are some things I don't have, but really what I have is sufficient. And being able to say I have enough, that's contentment. And that's sort of taking away this continuous striving to something that you haven't achieved. So contentment is very powerful for me. It is different from happiness.
I think we're meant to be talking about contentment, but I think the divide is often really tricky, so we may sort of verge into both of them at various times. For example, you hear phrases like, oh, happiness is the small things in life. I think they may actually be talking about excitement, just a very small amount of it. Just like, oh, you see a blue bird fly past and it makes you smile. Yeah, but it doesn't make you happier in your life. It just gives you a little bit of a smile. Now, if you're talking about happiness and you think you're talking about contentment, it's really hard to figure out when you are. But I think we're trying to talk about contentment.
Yeah, my sense is that one of the things that we all three ended up sharing in common was a sense that happiness is a deeper, more long-lasting state of life rather than a hit. I think we all ended up in a pretty similar world, even though we probably see happiness as coming from different places, but I think we all ended up defining happiness fairly similarly as something like contentment, yeah.
I saw a hand up over here.
From a neuroscience perspective, so I guess this is more aimed at Joseph, is there any sort of research, or are we coming across any sort of indication that, there's a hard wiring or some sort of like chemical structure that drives humans towards an urge for happiness?
Yes. Yes, there's research on it. Yes, there is a fair bit of evidence for it. Yes, there are entire subsets of the field devoted to it. Psychology deals with it in terms of emotion. Neuroscience deals with it in terms of particular channels and patterns and stuff in the brain that get stronger as you do things that make you happy. But even intrinsically, some people are born desiring certain things. There are some inbred things that people like. For example, religiosity. People who get enjoyment from religion and feeling religious, feeling a connection with a god or a higher being or many gods or all of that sort of stuff, that is notionally an actual inbred genetic, or possibly genetic, but inbred factor. You may inherit it, you may develop it early on in development inside the womb, but generally those kind of things are actually part of your brain. And if you wanted to look further into it, it's around the hippocampal region, the limbic system, and a dopamine channel.
I don't know whether you're interested in this, but I once met a monk who was written up in all those magazines as the happiest man in the world. He was a French monk. Before he became a monk, he was a PhD in biological sciences, which made him a great candidate to be a laboratory specimen for happiness. What they did is they hooked him up to a lot of electrodes. And can you imagine, 100 little, wires hooked up to you? They asked him to do his meditation, right? And an accomplished meditator has done at least, say, 10,000 hours of meditation to get to a certain level. So he was at that level. Now what they did was they asked him to do his typical meditation, which is a compassion meditation, sending compassion to all beings, humans, animals, every sentient being. And the more he did that, the more the prefrontal lobe, as Joseph said, lit up in their experiments. So what they found was that through meditation, it actually made a chemical or biological change to his brain, which when he turns it on, when he does his meditation, actually makes him very, very happy. So that part of the brain is correlated with happiness and all the good things like immunity to disease and all those other things. Now that's interesting in itself, but he went further when I saw him most recently. He shared something very important. Part of the experiment was where the scientists said, just be aware of suffering in the world. Like the earthquakes, the hurricanes, the floods and the fires, all those sort of natural disasters where there's tremendous suffering of humans and animals. And what they said, the scientists, they said, just be aware of all that suffering. And he's good at that. So he did that for about, a period of time, maybe half an hour or more. What he found was he was in meltdown after about half an hour, because what they were stopping him from doing was sending the compassion. So he was aware of all that suffering in the world, and they were saying, don't be compassionate, just be aware of it, just think about all that suffering. He went into meltdown, basically. Only when they said, hey, now you can turn on the compassion, then his happiness sort of shot up, biologically and according to the instruments. Now that to me is a very powerful thing, that being aware of suffering is actually a downer in a big way. Being compassionate and wishing people to be well and beyond their suffering actually helps people, and there's a lot of scientific evidence for this, to be happier. And I found that extremely interesting.
Bouncing straight off that, I wonder if, thinking about the chemistry that we have and so on, I wonder if we're actually made for relationships. So within that monk's mind, when he's taken out of relationships, he starts to go into meltdown. When he engages in relationships beyond himself, there's something really powerful in that. From my point of view, as I think about it as a Christian, we have a God who is relational because he's Father, Son and Spirit, who sent Jesus to come to us relationally. And I think he made us for relationships. And so I think that there's this hunger inside us for relationships with other people. And so at that point, I'm not sure how to fit it into chemistry, but I can definitely see this hunger that we have, that you just see people coming back to. What is the most important thing? It's the relationships I've got. Yeah.
All right, next question. Thank you.
Do you think that happiness is the most significant part of a good life?
Okay, so the question is, do you think that happiness is the most significant part of a good life or leading a good life? Most important.
Oh, goodness. Just ask a simple question. Do I think that happiness is the most important part of a good life? No. Can I leave it at that? No. I think it's an important part to being content, which is kind of circular. But being content facilitates you to be better at whatever you strive to do. All right? So whatever it is that makes a good life, it's almost definitely something you do, regardless of something that happens to you. It's not a passive thing. Living a good life is an active thing. And being happier in all senses of the possible range helps you do that. So I'd say it helps, and it's very important to be very successful at living a good life. But I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all. I'm not saying it's the end goal.
Well, let me pick up on what Greg said just a minute ago about relationships. And I actually agree with that, because I think we all need connections. So it gets back to what we were saying before about, is it for me or is it us? So to answer your question, is happiness the most important thing? I'd say being connected, relational in Greg's terms. It's actually connecting with others and helping others, serving others, and diminishing the ego, because all the scientific evidence suggests that the more you're focused on your own happiness or satisfaction, the more it won't happen, because it's very short term. It's a deeper kind of happiness or fulfillment, you might say, if we connect with others, if we relate to others, whether that's people or to kind of spirituality or to God or to Jesus. It's that connection beyond ourselves, which, whichever perspective you're coming from, gives you something in life. It gives you that purpose in life beyond yourself. So I wouldn't say happiness is the be-all and end-all. I think it's connecting with others.
As I think about it, I kind of ask myself, why did Jesus come? And I think in his mind, he came to do more than teach us, even teach us how to be happy. He came to save us. And so him dying in our place in order to, so that we can be forgiven by God and be with him forever, I'd say that's the key thing to the good life, that we're saved. I'd say inside of that is tremendous happiness as a byproduct. But for me, that Jesus came to die rather than just to teach us says, no, the key thing about the good life is being saved. Yeah.
Yep, we might have a question here.
This question is about your beliefs and values. So your beliefs and values about happiness, whatever that may be. How does that happiness retain itself when your beliefs and values are challenged by the society, by your environment, and so on?
So how do you retain your contentment, your happiness, when your own beliefs and values are challenged? Yep. You've had the last word the last 2 times, Greg. Go first, mate.
Well, nobody ever disagrees with or criticises Christians, so yeah, it's not really a problem for us. For me, as I think about it, there are loads of people who would be happy to say Christianity is wrong and what I think is wrong. The question that comes into my mind is, why would I believe that Christianity is true? And then it's, why would I believe the Bible is true? I go back to the question, did Jesus rise from the dead? If he rose from the dead, then what that means is that Christianity is based on historical truth, which means that I can trust the book. And so for me, that's how I would do it. I wouldn't want to be a Christian if I thought that it didn't hold up. And I think Christianity, one, being historically true if Jesus rose from the dead, also helps me to then make sense of the world. That's how I do it.
Concepts of happiness. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If I found that the way I achieve happiness was no longer effective, then I would adopt a new way of achieving happiness. I determined what the method was and the causes were by looking at the effect. So if I was living my life one way and it wasn't